very soon after falling asleep, I had an overpowering feeling that somebody was watching me.
Beside the bed, looking down at me, was my grandfather in the suit that they buried him in.
My aunt came in from the living room where she'd been with my mother and said, "Your mom died." And I said, "I know."
I didn't believe it either until I experienced it.
So I got under the covers, and very soon after falling asleep, I had an overpowering feeling that somebody was watching me. And when I opened my eyes, there was a dark figure, as if the outline of a man standing there over me. After a while, John's mom had gone off into the kitchen to make some more breakfast, and my sister had come in, and we're sitting there, and I kind of leaned back and I said, actually, I did feel like someone was in the room with me last night. There was a black shape that was standing by the bed looking over me. At least that's what it felt like. And John calls into the kitchen to his mom. He's like, "Hey, did you hear that, Ma? Luke says he saw a shape standing over him." And from the kitchen, his mother goes, "Oh, you met Paul." And she comes into the room. And I said, "Paul?" And she said, "Oh, sure. Paul hung himself in that closet up there."
I'm going to tell you the story about the morning my mother died. I was in bed and I was sleeping, and we knew that my mother's time was limited. She had cancer and had been in a coma for several days. And I woke up at about 6 a.m. and I looked, and at the foot of my bed, my mother was standing there, but she wasn't actually there because she was in a hospital bed in the living room. What I saw was my mother when she was about 28, and she was, at the point when she died, she was 48. So my mother, 20 years younger, whole, beautiful, standing, wearing white, and she was looking at me and smiling. And she did this expression that was something of excitement, like this, like that. And it was a very calm, peaceful experience. It didn't scare me. But I remember just looking at her at the bottom of my bed thinking, what is happening? And suddenly her mother, my grandmother, who had died 15 years earlier, also appeared next to her, wearing a pantsuit that I remember her wearing when we'd go shopping together when I was a little girl. And they both looked at me and smiled. And then they turned and were gone. Maybe a minute or two, I fell back asleep, and maybe a minute or two later, my aunt came in from the living room where she'd been with my mother and said, "Your mom died." And I said, "I know."
So my first real experience that I had, I was active duty Coast Guard, and I was stationed on a really, really old historical Coast Guard base that they had just recently revamped. And I was sleeping in a watchstander's room in the new building. And after I had fallen asleep, I heard somebody open the big heavy door into that room. And when I awoke, I saw this large man standing there, just kind of a silhouette of him. Could tell he had kind of coveralls and a big round hat on. And I remember thinking, who was that and where is he going? And being a little bit terrified. But I jumped up out of bed, and the door was on a slow door closure, so I reached out and grabbed the handle of the door really quick. And it was a long lit hallway, and there was nowhere for him to go. And when I looked out in the hallway, there was nothing there. The doors were closed and locked. And I remember feeling like that sense of like that hot flash, sweaty feeling, and just being kind of scared, and went and got another watchstander and said, hey, we have somebody walking around on the base, and we could never find anybody. So we just don't know. And then stories started to circulate that other people had experienced the same thing.
I mean, obviously there's a lot of room for doubt. It was one person in a room. These are how these things happen, right? People can't get photos of them. They can't get always sound recordings of them. So it's, like I said, it's an anecdote that I experienced. Nobody has to believe me. I'm not trying to convince anyone, but maybe it's a story that someone else out there can relate to, an experience that they've had, and that'll help them out in some way. But I've never tried to look at this as an argument where I'm trying to convince someone of something.
If someone were to say to me that it wasn't real, that would say a lot more to me about them, because it's just a fact that it happened to me. So I think they would be saying that out of their own discomfort towards the unknown. I'm comfortable with there not being a rational or explanation for my experience. I'm okay with that. I wouldn't feel like I had to prove them right, because it's my experience and it's a treasure to me. And I would prefer to not talk to them anymore about it, because it's something that's, well, a word I don't use very often, but it is sacred.
There's been plenty of people that question what I might be thinking and what I might be believing, including my spouse.
Does it bother you at all that he doesn't believe you?
No, it doesn't bother me. I think that at some point in his lifetime, he might experience something that he can't explain. And at that point, it may click that I was smarter.
Oh, Dad. Oh, Dad.